In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to go through the first big block of case law in the Torah, which moves from the Ten Commandments, which we saw in Exodus 20, and it's going to go into some concrete rules for life in the community. So regulations about Hebrew servants, homicide, personal injury, assault, how you protect your family and property, and justice. This includes the famous eye for an eye principle, which is going to be quoted later by Jesus Christ. So all of these statutes are really well designed in order that society may run smoothly. The weak are protected, you have disputes being settled fairly, and God's holiness is reflected in everyday justice. So, without further ado, let's read verses 1 to 11. The focus here in verses 1 to 11 is our laws about Hebrew servants and their release, and how do we balance authority and mercy in relationships of dependency today. So dependency, employer-employee relationships, caregiver and care, and who we're caretaking. That sort of relationship. So, verse 1 to 11. These are the ordinances that you shall set before them. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, but in the 7th he shall go out a free person without debt. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out a free person, then his master shall bring him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him for life. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt unfairly with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go without debt, without payment of money. Okay, so the next verses 12 to 17, this is going to concern homicide, manslaughter, and protection of life. So how does our commitment, this is the question, how does our commitment to the image-bearing dignity of each person, so everyone's created in the image of God, how does that shape the public and private justice that we show towards them? Verses 12 to 17. Whoever strikes a person mortally shall be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but came about by an act of God, then I will point for you a place to which the killer may flee. But if anyone willfully attacks and kills another by treachery, you shall take the killer from my altar for execution. Whoever strikes father or mother shall be put to death. Whoever kidnaps a person, whether that person has been sold or is still held in possession, shall be put to death. Whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death. Okay, now verses 18 to 31, this is about personal injury and assault, injury to pregnant women, striking parents, kidnapping, all of this stuff. So, where do we insist on restitution and protection rather than private revenge? The idea here is, where do we seek our form of revenge? And do we rely on the moral law that God has given us? Okay, so when individuals quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or fist, that the injured party, though not dead, is confined to bed, but recovers and walks around outside with the help of a staff, then the assailant shall be free of liability, except to pay for the loss of time and to arrange for full recovery. Verse 20. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished, but if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. Verse 22. When people who are fighting injure a pregnant woman so that there is a miscarriage, and yet no further harm follows, the one responsible shall be fined what the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. Verse 24. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. When a slave owner strikes the eye of a male or female slave, destroying it, the owner shall let the slave go, a free person, to compensate for the eye. If the owner knocks out a tooth of a male or female slave, the slave shall let go a free person to compensate for the foot. When an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall not be liable. If the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but did not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on the owner, then the owner shall pay whatever is imposed for the redemption of the victim's life. If it gores a boy or girl, the owner shall be dealt with according to the same rule. Okay, last 4 verses. Verses 32 to 36. This is about animals, so animal liability, property damage. We already saw some oxes here, and again, we're seeing how someone's responsibility for your animals sort of plays into the stewardship you have before God. Because remember, in the garden, one of the primary goals that Adam was given to by God was to steward over the creation and animals. So let's take a look here. Verses 32 to 36, we read the following. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall pay the slave owner 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If someone leaves a pit open or digs a pit and does not cover it, an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution, giving money to its owner, but keeping the animal dead. If someone's ox hurts the ox of another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the price of it, and the dead animal they shall also divide. But if it was known that the ox was accustomed to gore in the past, and the owner did not restrain it, the owner shall restore the ox for ox, but keep the dead animal. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed. Alright, time for some deep biblical unlocks. The first 11 verses, we have the treatment of Hebrew slaves. So a slave must serve 6 years. He must leave in the 7th year a free man. Now I must say something, just because this is going to come up a lot, especially in conversations with atheists, that the Bible supports slavery. What an evil book. Why would the Bible support slavery? I just want to point out something which is really critical to our understanding, and it's that slavery was normal in the ancient world, and it had limits and protections. Furthermore, the laws in the Torah, they are provided, and you'll even see that the slavery that they're talking about here is not the same thing as what we experience or what we think about when we think about slavery nowadays. When people think about slavery, they think about the American Southeast, I think. Yeah, the American Southeast, where you had plantations and picking cotton and stuff like that. The vision of 12 Years a Slave, the movie, immediately comes to mind. But that's not what slavery is. In the ancient Near East, a person would willingly sell themselves into slavery so that they can suffice during their everyday life. Interestingly, though, despite the normality of slavery in the ancient world, the God of Israel says, you'll serve 6 years, and in the 7th year, you shall be free. This was unheard of in the ancient Near East. Unheard of. And there was no racial exploitation or motivation behind it, right? So the underlying principles here is to abolish indefinite exploitation, to protect the family ties, because it says, you remember, hey, some of the slaves wanted to work for their master forever. Why? If it's so bad, if the social structures are so oppressive, why would you want to keep working? The point here is that slavery is not the same thing that we encounter or that we think of when we think about race-based slavery in the American Southeast. Interestingly, though, we see in verses 12 to 17, capital offense. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. If it's an accident, there may be refuge cities, and there are protections and procedures for determining whether or not it's premeditated. So here we have a distinction between premeditated murder and unintentional manslaughter. Verses 17, cursing a parent is, or I think striking a parent as well, if I'm not mistaken. I saw, whoever curses a mother or father shall be put to death. Cursing a parent is punishable by death. So again, honor your mother and your father, as we saw in verse 20. So again, the law that we see here protects and affirms the sanctity of life, because murder is one of the most severe crimes, because again, it destroys God's image. And the community must have a means of distinguishing between premeditated murder and accidental killing. Again, the heavy penalty for cursing reflects the centrality of the family and the consequences of dishonor. Okay, verses 18 to 31. This is where you see the famous verses. So, assault and retaliation. If men quarrel and one strikes another, but he doesn't die and becomes ill, the assailant must pay a fine. And we see the law of lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Hey, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. That's what that means. And it's introduced in verse 24, so Exodus 21:24. But this is actually, the law of retaliation and retribution was actually enacted to limit vengeance and provide proportional justice. That's why it's there. It's not that you can just start, so if someone punches you, get to punch them back. What's happening here is that you can only do as much as the person has harmed you. So you can only retaliate in the same extent. So this was meant to limit the amount of retaliation. And in the New Testament, and we'll see this in the Sermon on the Mount, the ethical genius of the Sermon on the Mount, in Jesus' teaching, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 to 42, we read, "You have heard," and this is very, very, very formative concerning retaliation. "You have heard," verse 38, "that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." So he quotes Exodus 21:24. "But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other one also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you." In this case, we see the law of retaliation, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, is meant to limit the amount of retribution you're meant to give. But Jesus said, don't even bother seeking retaliation, because it's better for your soul. So this law is actually going to come to its fulfillment in the New Testament through Jesus Christ.